Hi everybody, this is my video talking about Margaret Newman's HEC theory. So jumping right in, the first question, after reviewing the things that Tyler said, examine the themes found by McLeod in our article that we were supposed to read for this. Which themes resonate with Tyler's experience and, by extension, the young male caregiver experience? So the first thing that I really came up with here was the dyadic relationship life patterns influence caregivers' roles and responsibilities. In the article, it stated that the decision to act independent of their spouse was one of the main concerns that they found. And for Tyler, a direct quote that he stated was, he doesn't really want to back off the hobbies they shared together, but he wants to keep spending lots of time together. So for Tyler, this is probably one of the first times that he actually had to act independently of his wife since they've been together, because they do so many tasks together. They do rock climbing, biking, hiking. They're very active. So this is probably one of the first times that he needs to make a decision if he wants to continue doing those things without her. Another one that I identified was life patterns of caring for self and others were altered. In the article, it said spousal caregivers were reluctant to share their own emotions with their spouse because of the because of the potential of upsetting them. A direct quote that he again said in the prompt that we had was that he's afraid he'll react in a way that makes Lacey feel undesirable, and yet he just feels overwhelmed and doesn't want to hurt her. So this, to me, is a direct reflection in relation to the article. So let's see, which themes do not resonate with the experience he is describing? I chose the last one for this because awareness of life pattern gave meaning and new perception on life left to live. So to me, he can't really have an awareness of the life pattern and give it meaning if he doesn't know what the patterns are. So he has no really awareness of what the patterns are yet because he is just now sitting down with the nurse. So if he hasn't evaluated the patterns, he can't really apply them to his life and give it meaning yet. How does the phenomenon of a young male caregiver differ from the older caregiver dyads included in the article? Sorry, my cats. Stop it. So to answer this question, male caregivers generally experience less stress, depression, and burden from the caregiving experience than female caregivers. That's something that I pulled directly from the article. And although it doesn't really speak to the difference between older and younger male caregivers, I think it does highlight the importance that men typically experience less stress or depression from caregiving for their spouses. One thing that I did sort of extrapolate from the article that wasn't necessarily mentioned, but I think still has foundational meaning, is that in the article they said either the husbands had daughters living with them or they used friends, relatives, neighbors, and formal services heavily. And it was true for every husband that was in the study. So I think in general, older male caregivers have less of these resources available than do younger caregivers. Younger husbands typically don't have these hidden caregivers because they don't have children yet that are of age to care for the spouse. So I sort of extrapolated that, but I think it does fit for this question. In the situation, what would be the ultimate goal of the nurse's work with Tyler? In other words, what would it mean for Tyler to develop expanded consciousness as described by Newman? I think ultimately the goal here would be to help Tyler recognize the patterns that are driving his thoughts and behaviors, while also still recognizing that he's a unique individual with unique circumstances. So me as a nurse, my goal would be, what do you need based on your patterns, your life patterns? What are the patterns of your thought? So for him, it would look like, I really want to be active. Okay, well, what does that mean? Did you grow up active? Do you have some type of childhood trauma revolving around maybe you were obese as a child and now you're viewing exercise as the only way to control that anxiety, like just things like that. I think as nurses we can have that conversation, sit down, develop these patterns, and then help them apply that into their care as a spouse. So let's see, moving on. In 3 weeks' time, what interventions could a nurse use to help Tyler recognize both adaptive and maladaptive patterns and move towards expanding consciousness? What kinds of behaviors might indicate that Tyler will require more extensive support after discharge? I think interventions that the nurse could make specifically would just be have that conversation with both of them, maybe at first separately. What are you anxious about going home? Tyler, what are you anxious about going home? And see kind of where they line up, where they mesh. And I think that the prompt really did a good job of pointing that out and leading into some more maladaptive, what things might trigger the nurse to think that they might require more extensive support would be Tyler's statement that he can't imagine how sex life might change. I think this is something that can easily be addressed by a couples therapist or a psychologist in general. They both seem to have fear around this area, considering they both wanted children. So this is something that really shouldn't be left alone, that should be addressed immediately, or at least in a short-term window. Also, the fear of reactivity of hurting Lacey. He doesn't want to say something that would hurt her feelings, and he's afraid of how she might react to things that he's feeling, that he's saying. Again, I think couples therapy or a psychologist might be good here in this situation. And then lastly, what types of behaviors or statements might indicate that they have made progress? I think one of the biggest things I found was that Tyler is still diligent about going to see Lacey. He's visiting regularly, and he's clearly showing effort. He's showing that he cares. The fact that he himself is struggling with this shows that he cares. He states that he still finds her attractive, which is one of her biggest insecurities. And I think by him just communicating that with her is actually a strength for them. And lastly, they still seem to both want children. It's something that they both really were excited for, and they both still seem to want children. They're just not sure how to get there. So I think that is actually a strength, that they both still want the same thing despite these hurdles that they're overcoming. And I think that's all I had to say. Thanks for listening.